Well, hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to East End Books, Boston Seaport, and I appreciate you coming out on this brisk evening. Silver lining, no wind tonight, right? So thank goodness. But I think, because I have a few introductory remarks and announcements, I think I don't want to leave him standing. I just want to bring William Mann up here so he can sit in the director's chair, and then I'll go do my little introductions. It's so nice to have him here, our fellow Provincetown resident. We both reside in Provincetown, so it's just great to have a P-Town author, but also such an accomplished, phenomenal author. We have had other events with him, with William, and of course we have some of his books. I'm sorry we're sold out of Tinseltown, but we do have Bogey and McCall, and we have The Contender and some of the other books here as well. We also have, I get asked all the time, one of his earliest books, Where the Boys Are, in this series, which will be available again soon. Yep. I think we're sold out in Provincetown. This is the only one of this series. Okay. So when it's back, which hopefully will be soon, if you haven't read these books, they're phenomenal. And when they first came out, I was living in Florida, and we didn't get them. They were not there. And so, but I was coming to Provincetown a lot, and that's where I discovered, I discovered, I think, at Tim's used books. I discovered, I was like, oh my gosh. So then I was doing everything I could to get the entire series. One of them I got from London, from a used bookseller, and it's like, I remember those days. And then, it's so wonderful that like years later, you get to meet people you greatly admire. And I was like, wow. And then I think, we kind of encouraged them to bring them back out again. And they're just really wonderful. So we have a few copies here if you have not read them. And they're going to be back out. So anyway, I just strongly encourage you to do that. And then I wanted to also say that they haven't been here before, but William will talk a little bit about Casa Myrna is supposed to be here with some materials, and we are going to encourage you to make donations to them. And then also, maybe she's running late, Giselle Burr is coming with Theater Offensive. I don't know if any of you have gone to any of the performances. Giselle is about a little over a year into the role of the CEO of Theater Offensive. I'm chairing their capital campaign to help them build a theater in the Fenway. We just had a big event December 7th at the Quinn for them, and this is another phenomenal organization. If you get a chance to take a look at them, they were under attack by Trump and the Trumpies and the MAGA people. Giselle is a black trans woman from New York, and so has been and was appointed to the Commission on the Status of Women by Governor Healy, and then was brutally attacked by the far right for being a trans woman on the commission. So anyway, great organization, and if she does show up, we'll hear, you'll get to meet her. We have brochures, so when this breaks up, we have free newsletters and pamphlets about them if you're interested in that. They have a whole slate of shows all across the Huntington, all around the city. So then I just also wanted to just say, I'll do that after. I have just an announcement to make afterward, but this book, Black Dahlia, phenomenal. I was lucky to get an early copy of this. One of those books you cannot stop reading. The research, which if you've read William's books before, the research is impeccable. But it's not just that. You remember the old days way back when nonfiction, you could be reading it and you know that factually it's spot on, but it's boring. It's not with him. It never has been. His books are always fantastic. On our website, we have a full biography of William, but I just wanted to mention, of course, we've already talked, he's the author of Tinseltown, which was a phenomenal book. Murder, Morphine, and Madness at the Dawn of Hollywood. He won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Big Fat Crime. He's also written biographies of Marlon Brando, Elizabeth Taylor, Humphrey Bogart. Love that book. I absolutely love it. McCall. The Roosevelt Family, we do have a couple copies on the other side of that tall shelf. That's a great one if you haven't read that. and just won many awards. He's an adjunct professor of history at Central Connecticut State University. I can also say, I don't have the date yet, but if you are watching the live stream and you didn't get a chance to come here, but you want to see him in person, we will have an event with 20 Summers with William sometime this summer. We're just waiting on the date with Julia Glass and 20 Summers. So I wanted to just mention, and I'm going to just read it from here. See if I can manage to do this. So we have been, our bookstore, along with a number of the bookstores in Boston and many bookstores with the part of the American Booksellers Association, have been working hard to help our fellow friends in Minnesota and our fellow bookstore owners in Minnesota who are really dealing with so much with this fascist onslaught that's happening by that evil man in the White House and his Nazi stormtroopers. And I've had to talk to my employees who are getting hit on social media, like other bookstores. Yes, we've been posting, and we had a posting, and I thought I've seen it all after all these years and fighting the American Family Association for queer rights in Florida and DC, but some of the comments. So we put a post out that talks about our support for people in Minnesota, and there's a website which is, I just want to make sure I get this. It's www.standwithminnesota.com, which is a kind of a central point for getting involved, for protesting, peacefully protesting, for how you can support different organizations, legal funds, medical care. It's all there, and testimony from people on the ground about what's happening. And we posted that information along with this poem, which I just want to read, since we are a bookstore, and we hope to have an event, I think, with her, the brilliant poet Amanda Gorman. Amanda wrote this poem, and Amanda is dealing with all kinds of hate as well for people, along with people in Minnesota and us bookstores. But I just wanted to read this and then just encourage you to go to that website and do anything you can to help, and if it helps spread truth and help people who are really fighting for the future of our country, because our democracy is truly at stake. And since they supposedly are saying that Boston is next, we all need to be prepared. So this is the poem, in case you haven't seen it, from Amanda Gorman for Alex Jeffrey Preti. Murdered by ICE, January 24th, 2026, by Amanda Gorman. We wake with no words, just woe and wound. Our own country shooting us in the back is not just brutality, it's jarring betrayal. Not enforcement, but execution. A message: love your people and you will die. Yet our greatest threat isn't the outside among us, but those among us who never look within. For not those without papers, but those without conscience, know that to care intensely, united, is to carry both pain, dark horror for today, and a profound, daring hope for tomorrow. We can feel we have nothing to give and still beloved this world, waiting, trembling to change. If we cannot find words, may we find the will. If we ever lose hope, may we never lose our humanity. The only undying thing is mercy, the courage to open ourselves like doors, hug our neighbors, and save one more bright and possible life. I just think that's amazing that she wrote that and that she shared that with the world. So anyway, we persevere. We are strong people in America. And as our great Mayor Michelle Wu pointed out when she was hauled before Congress by the Republicans, we're tough in this state, and just remember, the American Revolution started here. So without further ado, we're thrilled to have William Mann here, and I hopefully among the things he talks about, I'm sure we'll probably mention a little bit about what the LA Police Department's doing and some of the videos we've seen. Fantastic book. Congratulations. Thank you for coming. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jeff. I would like to commend Jeff and really all booksellers. Booksellers are, in my opinion, cultural heroes. They are people who keep the idea of free speech alive. Books contain our culture. Books are the way to the future. And I think booksellers are often on the front lines of challenges to free speech. And Jeff in particular has done so much, and bringing people in and starting conversations, bringing in all sorts of ideas that we talk about, both here at this store and in the Provincetown store. So I want to thank Jeff for doing that.
Thanks.
I would also like to make a couple of other comments about this book. Before I get into the actual murder and the story of Elizabeth Short, I would like to point out that this book essentially is an expose of interpersonal violence. And we live in a world where violence is becoming more and more prevalent among people, among citizens, among families. And so I'm really pleased that we are co-sponsoring this with Casa Myrna. And if you don't know about Casa Myrna, it is an organization that works here in the Boston area to alleviate and to hopefully bring down the levels of violence, interpersonal violence in the Boston area. They work with people who are victims of violence, survivors of violence. So if you are looking to make a donation, I would encourage you to look to Casa Myrna or any other organization that is in this area or national that is looking at a way to bring down the levels of violence, especially violence against women, but also violence against all persons who are vulnerable. The story of Elizabeth Short is about a young woman who was incredibly vulnerable. And no matter how much agency that she had and she developed for herself, she still met with violence that ended her life. And that's the thing about this book, Black Dahlia. For the longest time, what I knew about this case was that a young woman was murdered. I didn't know much about her because the myth has her being a sex worker or just a promiscuous or living in the dark. She was actually not that. She was somebody who was exercising her own wanderlust and ambition to go out and see the world. And every previous book about this case has been focused on finding the killer. And when I started the research for this, I wanted to find the victim, because she has been lost in all of these conversations. And even using the word victim for Elizabeth Short doesn't feel right, even though obviously she was horribly victimized. But she wasn't a victim in her life. She was someone who made the choice to leave Medford, Massachusetts, not far from here, and go out and see the world. Women weren't supposed to do that in 1946, but she did. So my goal with this book was to find Elizabeth. Finding her killer is probably impossible to do, but so that became a secondary goal of mine. Hopefully, I've been able to point the direction in that way, because wouldn't it be great to find some justice for her after all these years? But really the most important thing to do was to find Elizabeth. And that's what to do that, I'm going to read the foreword to the book. But first I'll put on my glasses. There is a myth about a girl who came from the east to the land of sunshine and palm trees, wide-eyed and innocent and young, with a surging ambition to become a great movie star. But when the sun set and the dark shadows crept across the streets, the girl was seduced by the fancy men and false promises of the fabled city, and her dreams were extinguished like cigarettes in a barroom ashtray. She became hard, a creature of the night. The Black Dahlia, they called her. The fame she found was posthumous and grisly. Her nude, severed body, drained of blood, was discovered in a vacant lot in South Central Los Angeles, a Glasgow smile carved across her face. It was 1947, the era of film noir, that stylized, nihilistic genre of filmmaking that defined post-war American cinema. The dead young woman came to embody the corruption, immorality, and shattered lives of America's dream factory as much as any film by Fritz Lang or Jacques Tourneur. Today, bus tours take sightseers around Hollywood, pointing out the places where the Black Dahlia reportedly lived, ate, drank, sold herself, was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. But that's the myth. The Black Dahlia was a name bestowed by the media on a 22-year-old woman named Elizabeth Short, only after she was dead. The myth will tell you that she was a sex worker, a gangster's moll, or a movie extra yearning to become Lana Turner. She was none of those things. She was a young woman whose father had abandoned and rejected her, who was fired up by curiosity and wanderlust to leave her home. To leave her small New England town and see the world, defying increasingly draconian post-war gender expectations to settle down, marry, and have children. She lived by her wits and her charm as she traveled across the country, exploring places far more exotic than Medford, Massachusetts, where she was raised. Young men who embark on similar picaresque journeys, who finagle favors and get by on tall tales, become folk heroes, the plucky protagonists of movies and novels. Elizabeth Short, however, has been portrayed as lost, wayward, selfish, and like the seductive femme fatales of film noir, responsible for, and perhaps deserving of her fate. For a murder that has remained in the public consciousness for nearly 80 years, no serious study of the crime, its context and investigation has ever been published. The scholarly literature has all been about metaphor and theory, while the raison d'etre of the numerous popular books has been to solve the notoriously cold case. Every one of these commercial titles has built its solution upon conspiracies at the highest level, which is what we expect from noir drama. In these scenarios, the killer of Elizabeth Short goes free to protect, well, each book has had its own villain. Crooked cops, mobsters, politicians, businessmen, all of them safeguarded by cover-ups that are unearthed by each successive author. How else to explain how an entire police force of a major American city failed to find the killer of a young woman, even though that happens all the time? My objective has been not so much to solve the crime, which to me is a rather hubristic mission after 7 decades, especially when some very good detectives failed to do so, even with access to thousands of pieces of evidence that we don't have. Most of the records of this investigation remain sealed by the Los Angeles Police Department. What we have are the district attorney and FBI files, as well as some surprisingly revealing supplementary documents that I uncovered. I also interviewed family and friends of the principals, many for the first time. This enabled me to bring a fresh eye to the story of Elizabeth Short and the extraordinary investigation of her murder, with a goal of understanding what this young woman's story reveals about mid-century America, and also why it's still relevant today. To do this, we need to recreate that uncertain, anxious era after World War II, when the nation was grappling with new ideas, new demographics, new technologies and old fears that were dressed up like new ones. The end of the war did not, as expected, usher in a newfound sense of security and well-being, but rather a simmering unease about the role of women in society, racial integration, urbanization, the decline of religion, and the rise of sexual nonconformity. This was a period of atomic bomb tests and fallout shelters, witch hunts against communists and homosexuals, and panic over flying saucers and psychopaths. Only by situating the Black Dahlia case within this changing world can we understand what the tragedy of this young woman, whose life and death offer surprising mirrors on today. Elizabeth Short was no proto-feminist, but it's time we see her less as a femme fatale and more as a Tom Sawyer in ankle-strap shoes. She was a young woman who struck out on her own, leveraging what little agency post-war society gave her to explore the world just as young men had been doing since the country was new. 80 years later, women's autonomy over their lives and bodies is still being contested, often with the same sort of accusations of aberrant sexuality that many, even some of the detectives on the case, believed about Elizabeth Short. This is the first book that tries to see things as she did. She never gave an interview. She left no diaries, only an address book. We only have a handful of letters that she wrote that enable us to hear her voice. Most writers have, therefore, turned her story over to the detectives and journalists who investigated her murder. I've endeavored to find other perspectives as well, including the women who were Elizabeth's friends, often the only ones to support and defend her. We have an opportunity to see the Dahlia story in an entirely new way. Of course, I do have strong opinions on who might have killed her, and even stronger ones on who did not. You'll hear them in the book and see the evidence, both in support and in opposition to my ideas. Previous accounts of the murder seem to have been colored by confirmation bias, and by that I mean the culprit is determined ahead of time, and evidence is interpreted according to that theory, while other facts are ignored. And while there is indeed corruption in the story you're about to read, and bad apples in law enforcement and the media, those are details, not conclusions. True crime narratives deal with, in the words of pioneering FBI investigator John Douglas, the fundamentals of what we loftily call the human condition. Love, hate, jealousy, revenge, sadness, joy, triumph, despair. All of those make appearances in these pages. Ordinary people, Douglas wrote, operating at the terrifying extremes of those feelings, turn a young woman's murder into something less about her than about the forces around her. He's right, of course. We need that big picture context to understand what happened and why. But it is also about her. We can't lose track of the enterprising, curious young woman at the center of it, whose life was taken from her one bitterly cold night in Los Angeles in the early winter of 1947. My feeling about this case, which is I've been now following for the last 5 years, trying to figure it out, finding who these people were, especially who Elizabeth Short was. My feeling is that it was a projection of what was to come, what is to come. And I think by understanding Elizabeth Short and understanding how her murder was investigated, how it was perceived, we can understand a lot more about how we live today. This isn't, there are lots of unsolved murders. And it's fun to sit around and try to say, oh, was it Professor Plum with the wrench in the drawing room or all of that? That's fun. And I'm happy to engage stories Because there's a lot of good ideas out there about who might have done this horrible thing. But we can't lose sight of the fact that these are human beings. And too often, I think, when we talk about some of these famous unsolved crimes, we think only of the killer. And if we find him, we've won the prize. Recently, there's been another person in the news who's come out and said, "Oh, I've solved the Black Dahlia murder," and kind of like, aha, I've done it. Nobody else could do it. What those detectives, with all that evidence out there, I was able to do from the privacy of my own home. That kind of always has struck me as being a lot of hogwash. That doesn't mean that there aren't some good ideas out there. But what we have to do, whether it's Elizabeth Short or other cases, we have to understand the people involved and the times involved. So if you decide to buy my book, you're going to get a detective story, but you're also going to get an account of the times, those years after the war, and what that was like for people. And I think you're going to find that there's a lot of parallels to today. That's what I have to say. Now I would love to talk with all of you, see what you all have to say. If you want to talk about Elizabeth, if you want to talk about the way her death was investigated, if you want to talk about suspects, all for it. So anyone here has thoughts, and I suspect some of you know about this case because you're here tonight. So I'd love to, and also she's from here. She was from Medford, Massachusetts. Her family lived in Medford up until her last sister died, which was only a few years ago. Her mother lived here all her life and died when she was in her 90s. It's a family that's been entrenched in the Boston area. Her mother worked every day as she took the trolley, or the trolleys from Medford into Boston to work, where she was a bookkeeper. So these are our people. And so, some of you might have been hearing of this story for a long time. So let's have a conversation. Who might want to offer some ideas or questions? Yes.
Well, I don't have a question.
Yeah.
I don't have a question about the case.
Right.
The question I have is the comment that you made is that it sounds like you were able to actually interview some people that were still alive that knew her. I mean, this was a long time ago. Were they primary sources or were they secondary sources?
Yeah.
I mean, because you're investigating something
80 years ago.
That happened 80 years ago.
Right, yeah.
Would make her over 100 and
right.
And she was young. So
right,
even
right,
her
exactly.
youngest contemporaries.
Right, right. I should have clarified that the people that I interviewed didn't know her personally, because it's impossible really to find. I imagine there's some people who were children at the time who might have remembered her. But I interviewed people who, the children and grandchildren of her friends, who could tell me about their grandmother and how their grandmother lived, and she told me how she and Elizabeth got this apartment in Hollywood, and they would tell me what their grandmother told them about that apartment, and I realized, okay, I'm getting a glimpse now of how Elizabeth might have seen this world. I interviewed families of the original detectives, and their remembrances of what their grandfathers said about the case and how it just haunted them to the day they died.
And it was so notorious that it got passed on.
Yes, right. They knew, everybody knew this. I interviewed people who were children and grandchildren of some suspects who told me how, yeah, I knew my father was a suspect. Others who said, I didn't realize he was a suspect. I'm sorry to break it to you. As a historian, I teach history, and you have to evaluate your sources. So if somebody said to me, well, I knew somebody who knew her, that's helpful, but it's not really going to form my opinion. I really need to talk to people who knew, who were directly connected to the people who were in her life. And they really helped me, especially the Well, the family of a couple of her friends, her women friends, were especially helpful because they could tell me what their grandmothers were like. And then if they were friends of Elizabeth, I'm assuming that Elizabeth had shared some of those attributes. Also, the detectives' grandchildren were really helpful because they shared with me papers that their grandfathers had and some of the writings they'd done. So that was really important. And whenever you do a project like this, you need to find people who can connect you to the people you're writing about in some way. But thank you, that's a great question. Yeah.
You said that the files are still closed?
Yes.
I'm not loud enough.
Well, it's just the live,
When will they be open?
it's
Is
just the
there a
live stream.
time limit? Is it going to be like after 100 years we allow the public to see these?
I hope so. They have not said. I mean, it's been 80 years. It's still considered an open case, though they have admitted they're not investigating it. So I'm not sure why it's an open case. Until those records are open, you can't really draw any conclusions. For example, I do end up coming to the conclusion of who I think was the most likely among the suspects to have committed this crime. And he becomes a serious suspect right at the end of the district attorney's investigation around 1950. After that point, the district attorney turned it back over to the LAPD and said, okay, you can continue on.
Locked it up.
And they locked it up. Okay. So I don't know what follow-up was done on that. And until we know, it's impossible to say. So I always, in the book, not to spoil anything from you, I don't announce I found the killer, but I do present some evidence that I think is pretty compelling.
Somebody important enough for the police to cover up for.
Yes,
That
exactly.
never
Never happens.
happens.
Right. The other story I'll just add, though, to that, one of the things I did with the book was that I sent for the FBI records of everything. I wanted to see, and put in a FOIA request. And I paid basically everybody in the book. I wanted to see if there was anything on any of them.
Sure.
And, 90% of the requests came back. They would say, we have no records responsive to your request, which means they don't have them. A couple of times I got back, we have found records and they will be sent to you. But for one of these individuals, I got a response that said, we can neither confirm nor deny whether we have records. Therefore, we are closing your request. It's pretty easy to make a conclusion of what that means, right? So I appealed it and I said to them, listen, I think this individual may be the culprit in an 80-year-old murder case that would be really nice for, there are still family members, nieces and nephews and cousins out there. It'd be really nice if we could close this case for them. And they wrote back and said, nope. So all I can conclude from that is they are treating this individual differently than all the others. Why? I do speculate on some of the reasons in the book, but yeah, that's clearly there's something there, and until we know what's there, it's hard to draw absolute conclusions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Something that I've heard discussed is that there is potential DNA under the defensive wounds on her hands. With modern DNA advancements over the past 80 to 50 years, do you think it's feasible or possible to have there possibly be any DNA under, fingernails, or was that rubbed off with the gasoline itself?
Yeah, there's a couple of things to that. There could definitely be some DNA, because if they didn't have that technology at the time, so they couldn't do that. She wasn't cremated, so she is buried. The body could be exhumed. But we do know two things. The body was incredibly scrubbed everywhere. And they found even bristles from the brushes that would use to scrub this body. After the body was drained of all blood and bisected and then scrubbed before they sent it out. The other thing is, it would be really great if there was something under the fingernails, but anybody who knows the case knows that Elizabeth Short bit her fingernails down to the quick. And so I think it'd be really hard to get anything under there. There was, you know, her fingernails were the autopsy says they were something like, you know, 1/16 of an inch, you know. So they were always raw, and she was biting her fingernails all the time. So I would love to say, yeah, maybe it's there, but I think the likelihood is pretty low. Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine that they embalmed her, right?
I don't know that.
So,
I mean,
corpse.
she had a funeral. She had a funeral.
yeah, but you don't have to embalm her.
No, right, yeah.
But the corpse would be rotting. I mean, how much are you going to get?
Yeah, but you can still find DNA if there was. But I think the body was, I can't say whether it was embalmed or not, but they did because her poor mother had to identify the body, and they did try to fix her up as best as possible before her mother saw her.
But then wouldn't you have to exhume all of your suspects? There's no DNA database.
Right, yes, exactly, yeah. The one way that the detectives were going after this was there had been one piece of mail that the police received, assuming from the killer, though they never were certain it was the killer. It was an envelope filled with her belongings, so like her address book and some, photos and things like that. And it had been doused in gasoline to hopefully prevent any fingerprints. But they found fingerprints, and inside, all the contents that were inside had been clearly put in there with somebody wearing gloves. So there were no fingerprints to be found. But they were smart. It was addressed with cutout letters from the newspapers. And they were smart. They peeled those letters off, and they found some fingerprints behind the letters where they were glued on. And the best they could try to use those to identify the suspects, and it matched none of the suspects. I'm kind of leery about the quality of those fingerprints from, a partial fingerprint from something that was pasted down in an envelope and then doused with gasoline. Just feels like that's not a very strong imprint that you're going to get. So who knows if that'd be helpful. Yeah, I just, it's the only way I think this will be solved, and we can say case closed, is if the LAPD releases those records, and then there's something in there where one of the detectives who interviewed this figure that I'm not giving anything away, that I think is the most likely, and if they've come to some conclusion about him, and perhaps they couldn't arrest him because they didn't have enough evidence. But if there's something in there, then we might be able to, within a reasonable doubt, say we've solved this. But beyond that, I can't see how we would ever do this. Yes.
So what was it like for you writing this book for 5 years? It's a good problem.
It was intense, and it was maddening sometimes. And I came to really care about my subject and admire her and like her. And people would say, well, she never did anything remarkable. She never did anything, she wasn't, But I kept saying, look, she's 22 years old. Well, she didn't really have a job. She was kind of like flighting a plane. I said, I know a lot of 22-year-olds who couch surf at their friends' houses, And that's what you do when you're 22. And why are we passing judgment on her for doing it? I became very defensive of her, because, from what we know about her, she was a really good person. One of the great gifts, it's right here at the Medford Historical Society, which I knew they had some Elizabeth Short papers, but I didn't know what was there, and I thought, well, it's probably just pamphlets from the town or something. But in fact, one of the people from her neighborhood where she grew up, who was about 5 or 6 years younger than Elizabeth. When she became an adult, she wrote her own memoir about Elizabeth, and she interviewed Elizabeth's sisters. And although she published a book, a small little book, she didn't include any of that stuff from her sisters, but the Medford Historical Society has these records, these interviews. And through those interviews, I was able to learn that Elizabeth was always saving stray dogs. She was bringing stray dogs into her room, and her mother said, you can't bring these dogs in. She said, but they're cold, we got to bring them in. There was a little girl in the neighborhood who had been sexually molested, and when people learned of that, they didn't want to talk to the little girl because they thought this was just too weird. And Elizabeth went over and said, we want to go to the movies, and she took her to the movies. Her mother was working all the time. She had 5 daughters, no husband, and Elizabeth, took her little sisters out to get ice cream and buy them school books and things like that. When school came around, I said, this is a good person, her friends liked her. She could be, a little fickle at times. She could get a little impatient with people. She knew, she knew how to get her way. She'd sit at a lunch counter in Los Angeles, and she had no money, and she'd see a guy sitting next to her, and she'd smile at him, and she'd say, that hamburger looks really good. And he'd say, oh, can I buy you one? Oh, sure, if you want to. And I kind of think that's good for her. She knew how to get a hamburger. Other people think, oh, she's being wayward, and, good for her. She found a way to survive. And so I became very defensive of her in reading. And so when I would read some of the other books that were written about her, I would actually get angry. Like, come on, this is, give the poor kid a break, So yeah, there were a lot of emotions up and downs as I was writing the book. Yes?
It's commonly believed that she was going to, I think it was Chicago, Detroit, that general area when she was dropped off at the hotel, I forget the name of it.
The Biltmore.
The
Yeah.
Biltmore Hotel,
Yeah.
yes. And she had checked her luggage in for the bus or train ride to go there.
Right.
I personally believe that the person that she met up with to acquire the money to take that bus trip, I think it was $20, which is equivalent to 500 USD today.
Right.
Do you believe that the person that she met up with at that particular point is the suspect that committed the murder? Or do you think it goes further than that?
I think what you suggest is a very good possible scenario. So Elizabeth's last week alive has not been credibly documented. There were several sightings of her that police were able to find later on, but the last credible sighting of her was in the lobby of the Biltmore Hotel, where she had been dropped off by an acquaintance on her way back from San Diego. And she was supposedly waiting for her sister to take this trip. She made that up, apparently, because the sister, when she was found out, was that we had no plans. So Elizabeth but she was also, completely broke. So whoever she was going to meet was going to have to help her out in some way. She had nowhere to stay. And so this whole week, she's we can't account for her whereabouts. So there's 2 scenarios. She meets someone who then keeps her prisoner, because why? How we know she was kept against her will for at least part of that week is that her good friend Ann Toth, who I thankfully talked to her family and was able to really get a feeling of Elizabeth through Ann's memory of her. She called Ann to the home where Ann was living and said, can I come and stay there at that night? And the man of the house, Mark Hansen, said, no, not until Ann is back. I don't want you to come back until she's here. She'll be back tomorrow. And Elizabeth said, all right, I'll call her tomorrow. She never did. Ann said she would have called me if she could have. So we know that at some point that week, probably within the first day, she was indisposed. So it could be that she met somebody for that first night and they were perfectly innocent. Yeah, you can sleep on my couch, that's cool. And that she was the next night or the night after that she met someone. But or it could have been right from that moment on. There's lots of stuff in the book about a series of harassing phone calls that Anne received during that week. And, you know, did that have to, was Elizabeth being held and someone was making these calls? But this person also, who I'm speculating about, also had some issues with Anne. So we don't know. But yeah, all of these scenarios are possible. Yes. Yeah, please.
So, you know, obviously this happened, you know, 80 years ago.
Right.
And there have been countless unsolved murders.
Right.
Why do you think this is something, you know, that still is in the
People
somewhat
still talk about, right?
public
Yeah.
consciousness?
Yeah. So I actually go into that in the book. I think there are a lot of reasons, and one of the original detectives said the reason this stayed in the public mind for so long are two reasons. One, the sheer grisliness of the crime, the gruesomeness of the crime. There's nothing else to compare it to. You know, the bisection, the draining of the blood, the mutilation, it's you know, still a horrifying thing. We've become so inured in some ways to violence, but this is still something that shocks people. But it's also the name, the Black Dahlia. That was something, as I said in the foreword, it was not something that she was called in life. Her friends all said, "What do you mean Black Dahlia? What's that all about? I've never heard of that." And she's given this nickname because some reporter goes into a lunch counter and the guy's like, "Oh yeah, I remember her, you know, yeah, some guy called her the Black Dahlia because, you know, she had this big black hair and down the street was playing a movie called The Blue Dahlia." Right down the street, I checked in the newspapers, it was right there at that time. And, you know, it was kind of like, if that's the Blue Dahlia, then this is the Black Dahlia. So then the newspapers, you know, which you were making a lot of money selling newspapers on this case, they played up that name. And so that name seeps into the culture and seeps into, you know, the culture of film noir. And there are shadows of this case in so many movies from the 1940s and 50s. You know, the woman at night with the black clothes, like, you know, moving to the shadows, which Elizabeth Short was not doing that, but that's what the Black Dahlia became in the public memory. So I think it's the two things. It's the sheer brutality of the crime, but also this name that elevated her from, you know, nameless victim to this, you know, this almost mythological creature. And that's why I think it's still remembered today. Yes?
How do you see the social political landscape of time impacting how people responded to her murder, and then also how just impacted maybe the murderer's motives at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, that's why I said in the foreword, it's really important to see it in the context of the times. So during World War II, women saved the American economy. They, you know, the men were all fighting overseas, and so women moved into the factories and the offices and filled that role, kept the economy moving. Then all the men start coming home after the war, and employers say, "Thanks, honey, we don't need you anymore," right? And go back home and put on your apron and have more babies. And for a lot of women, that wasn't good enough. You know, they had experienced their own autonomy, and they thought, "No, I want to keep working. I want to do my life." And during this period of time, right after the war, I got the murder rates, and the murder rate had been plummeting, and then suddenly in 1946 it starts shooting up, for both men and women. But and I'm going to quote the wrong figures, but it's something like the murder rate for men shot up about 25%. For women, it was 70%. So women were being killed in unprecedented numbers in this period. So you can't see this crime without understanding that, right? So if Elizabeth is, in the world, kind of making her own choices, doing what she wants, there is this pushback against women who are unmarried and living on their own in cities. And I have to see that within this murder. It doesn't mean that Elizabeth was consciously killed for this, but this was the attitude among some people. towards women like herself who were not at home having babies and not at, and working or not working, just kind of living on their own.
Or asking for it.
Yes, exactly. They were asking for it. Yep. And many people have said that about Elizabeth Short. Do you know that about 4 months after the murder, one newspaper ran a poll asking its readers, is the Dahlia to blame? And the results were, inconclusive. Some people were saying, yeah, she was out there asking for it. She had too many boyfriends, and other people said, no, she wasn't. So that's the way people were thinking. Anybody else?
Well, we could go to book signing and people can continue to converse and chat with you.
Thank you all for coming on such a
Thank
cool
you.
night.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, William. And just for the live stream audience and people later, we'll have William sign store stock after this. So until they run out, we'll have signed copies. If you're wanting a signed copy on our website, if you buy it in the memo section, you can ask if we have signed copies left and request one. So once they're out here, we'll be out. But then William lives in Provincetown, and we will be having a summer event, so we'll have them again. And I think he will be back and forth in Provincetown, so I know I can get some more books signed. But we want to thank you very much for coming. And if you want to know about our future events, check out our social media. But also, if you go on our website, you can get onto our newsletter list, and we have all the information out there. And we'll be releasing soon, starting to release soon, the summer schedule. And once again, like every year, we'll have a lot of events going on in Provincetown, special events, and also here in Boston. And we, again, thank you for coming. Thank you.